Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is KRAFT, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 5 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, with all the injuries and, of course, upcoming bye weeks, many of us are in trouble going into Week 5. We have teams like the Lions, Eagles, Titans, and, of course, Los Angeles Chargers on bye week. So, again, we won't have those services of those players. Now, we're also dealing with the fact that there were major injuries in Week 4. Jonathan Taylor, Rashee Rice, Anthony Richardson, Christian Watson, and even Malik Neighbors could potentially be in that concussion protocol. Depends on how that goes ahead in transitions. But going into this upcoming week, many of our rosters may be thin. So we want to hit the waiver wire. So over the course of today's episode, I'll talk about the best available running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and defenses. Players who are not only going to help you capture a victory in Week 5, but hopefully help your team for the remainder of the season. Now, if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, there are timestamps down in the description of the video. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe again after today's game between, of course, or I guess the two games, the Miami Dolphins taking on the Tennessee Titans, and of course the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Detroit Lions. After those two games conclude, I will be live streaming here on the channel, so for those of you interested, be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's go ahead and begin by talking about the running back position going into Week 5. I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost mention, if in fact these three players aren't already rostered in your league, shame on you guys, but be sure to make sure that they're rostered. I mean, again, we're talking about RICO DOWDLE, who on Yahoo Fantasy, 48% rostered, sleeper 56%. Bucky Irving on Yahoo has a 52% rostership, on sleeper 62%, and of course Jamar Chase 61 and 57%. RICO DOWDLE is the starting running back of the Dallas Cowboys. Having the starting running back for fantasy of the Dallas Cowboys over the course of the last couple seasons has been extremely valuable. And considering he has been the starter since Week 3, we have seen heavy workload go in his direction. And even though he's not going to be the primary receiving back, as they prefer the fullback on this team, the fact of the matter is that Zeke has been transitioned out of the offense. And if you can get a share of this backfield, why not? Especially considering they're going to be in negative game scripts and there may be more opportunity for him to work within the receiving game. But of course, get himself double-digit rushing attempts every single game. Now, Bucky Irving, we've talked about for consecutive weeks in regards to the lack of production from Rachaad White. And that continued this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. Of course, Bucky Irving got the most valuable attempts out of the entire backfield. In terms of overall targets, Rachaad White only got 3, Bucky Irving got 2, mainly because, in terms of overall routes ran, Bucky Irving ran 20 routes, while Rachaad White only ran 24 routes. So there wasn't a huge difference. In terms of rushing attempts, Bucky Irving 10, Rachaad White 10. Bucky Irving getting the 2 most valuable rushing attempts within the game on the goal line, scored the first time, unfortunately was called back in the next play after the review. They brought him back in, he punched it in, scored a touchdown, scored over 12 fantasy points, and going forward is going to continue to be one of the primary rushers of this offense, and it's a great offense to have a running back associated with. Moving on to Chase Brown. Again, if in fact somebody somehow dropped him because of his lack of production early, again, we knew that it would take some time for Chase Brown to start to win this backfield, but still, as of right now, Zach Moss is in pole position to be the starter. He's still getting himself a high volume of overall snaps, which is 60% in comparison to Chase Brown's 40. He is still getting himself, more overall routes ran, more overall targets, more overall, rushing attempts as a whole. So going forward, yes, we're going to see more and more Chase Brown, but again, scoring 20 fantasy points is something that we cannot ignore. Having 15 rushing attempts for 80 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns wasn't an accident. Going forward, Chase Brown's going to continue to get more and more work within the Cincinnati Bengals backfield. Okay, so anyway, PSA, if you haven't gotten them rostered, be sure to do so. Now, before I do begin talking about my top 6 running backs going into Week 5, a reminder, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog, be sure to go ahead and travel down to the description today. If you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, includes flex rankings so that you can help set your lineups and, of course, lead yourself to a 2024 fantasy football championship. So for those of you interested, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And if in fact you are not eligible, you can also go ahead and check out the Patreon where we have rankings there. Thank you very much. All that information down in the description. And of course, if you sign up today, you can take advantage of tonight's free new customer special. Of course, 0.5 total yards for Tyreek Hill. So you don't have to really worry about whether or not Tyler Huntley is going to be relevant. You can go ahead and put together a pick today and find success. All right, let's go ahead and begin with my top 6 running backs, beginning with Kareem Hunt. This is the 3rd consecutive week in which I have had Kareem Hunt within the waiver wire episode. A couple weeks back, had him as the number 1, mainly because I knew there wouldn't be a reason in which the Kansas City Chiefs were going to sign Kareem Hunt unless they knew that they needed him. And the fact of the matter is, already we have seen, based on yesterday's overall performances, Kareem Hunt is going to be the starting running back of this team until the return of Isaiah Pacheco. In terms of overall snap counts, 45% led the backfield with 14 rushing attempts for 69 rushing yards, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 16 receiving yards, and 9.5 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. If it wasn't for the fact that Samaje Perine stole the red zone rushing touchdown, we would have had a 15-plus point game from Kareem Hunt, and we'd be even more excited about his overall potential. But at this current moment in time, only rostered in 35% of Yahoo leagues, 38% of sleeper leagues. Shame on all of you who went ahead and ignored the potential of Kareem Hunt going forward. I understand that Carson Steele looked great last week, but again, it was mainly because of the absence of Kareem Hunt being elevated. Now he has been elevated and he has put Carson Steele back on the bench. So going forward, the way I see it, especially considering all of the injuries that the Kansas City Chiefs, receiving core has been able to sustain, Rashee Rice, Hollywood Brown, and of course, Pacheco, with all these injuries, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have to rely upon the running game more than they ever have over the course of the last couple years. Because again, now truly more than ever, Patrick Mahomes has no weapons. Over the course of the last couple years, we've complained about him having no weapons. Now he truly has no weapons because of all of the injuries. It's going to be the Travis Kelce show and Kareem Hunt show going forward as of this overall team. Our number 2 is Trey Sermon. Again, I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of injuries. Now, besides Rashee Rice, we also had an injury that took place to, of course, Jonathan Taylor, sustaining the dreadful high ankle sprain. Now, if in fact this is something that he is going to miss time for, of course, you want to pick up your handcuff to the blue chip running back. A player like Trey Sermon only being rostered in 1% of Yahoo leagues, 4% of sleeper leagues. Again, this is an injury that Jonathan Taylor in the past has sustained back in 2022. In fact, it ended his 2022 overall campaign. So if we're going to be in a situation in which Jonathan Taylor is going to have time off, perhaps go to the injured reserve, or perhaps even require surgery in order to fix this, depending on how severe it is, we're going to have to go ahead and address Trey Sermon, depending on how severe it is. Now, I don't believe it's going to be as severe as that, where he's going to miss a huge volume of time, but anytime a running back sustains a high ankle sprain, they're going to miss at least 2 to 3 weeks on average. Hopefully he only misses 1 to 2. We'll have to wait and see depending on where that Colts bye week lands. As of right now, Trey Sermon is the guy that you want to pick up and utilize, especially considering if we're going to also see Anthony Richardson out, all of the rushing opportunities will be going to Trey Sermon, and he could very easily have himself high upside of potential behind this incredible offensive line. Last season, in the game in which he started for the Indianapolis Colts, 17 carries for 88 rushing yards, has proven to be a valuable back, even in week 3 in which he scored a rushing touchdown for this offense against the Chicago Bears. There's a lot of upside, and again, you want to have your handcuffs to your blue chip running backs. Number 3 is Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby's overall situation is interesting. Obviously, Travis Etienne sustained a shoulder injury on Sunday against the Houston Texans, and if in fact that is going to be something that is going to slow him down or transition more of the overall touches in the direction of Tank Bigsby, this is something that we want to pay attention to. Currently only rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues, 18% of sleeper leagues. Tank Bigsby's coming off of a game in which he had 7 carries for 90 yards, but it wasn't so glorious across the board every single carry, but he did have a 58-yard rushing attempt, which was huge. He only played 29% of the overall snaps, but had 7 of the overall 18 rushing attempts between him and Travis Etienne. So if in fact we're going to see more and more workload go in the direction of Tank Bigsby, there is a potential in which he can be fantasy relevant. But considering how bad the Jacksonville Jaguars offense has been, running the ball isn't going to be a priority for them, especially considering they really cannot keep a lead in any of these games. Moving on to Emmanuel Wilson. We're mentioning backup running backs every single time here, but Emmanuel Wilson continues to dig into the overall workload of Josh Jacobs. When you go ahead and compare the overall, statistics, Emmanuel Wilson, 30 snaps played in comparison to Josh Jacobs, 46. It's pretty much a 40-60 split in terms of overall percentages. Then in terms of routes ran, Emmanuel Wilson, 12, Josh Jacobs, 26. Now, obviously, in the routes ran department and target department, Josh Jacobs led 5-0 in terms of total targets. But in terms of rushing attempts, Emmanuel Wilson with 8, and of course, Josh Jacobs with 9. I would contribute that to the fact that the Green Bay Packers were down 4 scores at one point in that game. So if in fact they're going to be in those kind of situations going forward, of course, we may see more Emmanuel Wilson. But until then, I think it'll still be Josh Jacobs' backfield. But you always want to have the RB2 of your primary, stud, quote-unquote stud. Josh Jacobs hasn't played like one as of late. Over the course of the season, you want to have your handcuff. But either way, we know that the Green Bay Packers have shown a tendency to want to use a two-headed monster with A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones, and going forward could be the same. We move on to Justice Hill, who every time there is a highly competitive game against a very competitive team, for example, taking on the Chiefs in week 1, or most recently in week 4, taking on the Buffalo Bills. Anytime there's a competitive matchup, the guy has himself a monster performance and finds himself a lot of success within the receiving game. So if in fact we're going to find ourselves in very similar situations going forward, the upcoming schedule against Cincinnati, Washington, Tampa Bay, all teams that are very much so in the hunt, there could be a conversation in which Justice Hill can continue his success and still be fantasy relevant. When you have guys like Mark Andrews with 0 receptions, Isaiah Likely with 1, Zay Flowers with 1 by the end of the game, and Justice Hill is leading the team in terms of overall receptions at the end of the day, of course he has value and we shouldn't ignore that. Moving on to the final option, it is Tyler Allgeier. Again, like I mentioned before, we want to make sure that we have the handcuffs to our blue chip running backs on roster. So be sure to go ahead if in fact you have Bijan Robinson. somehow, some way, Tyler Algier is still available in many of leagues. 23% rostered on Yahoo, 34% rostered on Sleeper. Please do yourself a favor and have Tyler Algier on roster, especially considering he's coming off of a week in which he had 10 total touches and over 100 total all-purpose yards. That's a lot of value. I understand that he fumbled and it didn't help his overall upside, but ultimately, if he's going to be this efficient, this could be a running back that could be of value. The only other running back I wanted to mention as an honorable mention is Alexander Mattison. For another week here, we have Zamir White fumbling. And if in fact we're going to be in a situation where Alexander Mattison supplants him and takes over the starting role, do not be surprised. That is my honorable mention, number 7 of the week. Let's move on to the wide receiver conversation, and we have Xavier Legette. Of course, the hidden gem of Xavier Legette, the space stone of the week, absolutely, again, like we mentioned, was going to shoot for the moon and fell amongst the stars and found himself an incredible performance of 10 targets, 6 receptions, 66 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, 2 rushing attempts for 10 yards, and 16.6 fantasy points and a half PPR, playing 87% of the offensive snaps, running 37 routes, of course, a season high. If he continues to be on this pace where he's playing, what, like 66% of his routes out wide, 34% from the slot position. They're using him on jet sweeps. Andy Dalton has looked great and has obviously elevated this offense. The fact of the matter is, Xavier Legette is going to be the number 2 receiving option just behind Deontay Johnson in the absence of Adam Thielen. And if Xavier Legette can continue to perform as well as he has just in this last week, he's going to continue to be of value. And even in the return of Adam Thielen, maintain as a starter, considering this offense loves to use 11 personnel and 3 wide receivers minimum on the vast majority of their overall formations. Moving on to our number 2. DONTAYVION WICKS, who yesterday, I think only 1 or 2 people throughout the live stream on Sunday morning, 7 to 10 a.m. every single Sunday morning. But this upcoming Sunday morning, because there is a London game between the Jets and, of course, the Vikings, I will start at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So for those of you interested, this upcoming Sunday morning, starting at 6 a.m. But throughout yesterday's live stream, somebody asked me, should I play DONTAYVION WICKS? And I said, all right, you know what? Screw it. Let's go for DONTAYVION WICKS. Let's hope for it. And I did not anticipate, first and foremost, Christian Watson sustaining an injury and now going to the injured reserve. But DONTAYVION WICKS having 13 targets, 78 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns in a monster comeback game in which, of course, we saw a lot of fight in Jordan Love and that, of course, passing attack for the Green Bay Packers, which is only going to continue to improve. Now, with DONTAYVION WICKS getting a greater role within this offense, when we go back to last season, 2023, in games in which DONTAYVION WICKS was given 7 or more targets, he was averaging 13.9 half PPR fantasy points per game. I mean, amongst all wide receivers, he ran just as many routes as Jayden Reed yesterday. So as long as he's going to be implemented and implicated to be a starting wide receiver for the Packers for the foreseeable future in the absence of Christian Watson, he can continue to dig out a role and even in the return of Christian Watson, be valuable for fantasy for the remainder of the season. Moving on to our number 3, Wan'Dale Robinson. Again, I've mentioned him for, 3-4 consecutive weeks here. Wan'Dale Robinson should have already been picked up, but if he has not yet already, understand that he's number 4 amongst all wide receivers in fantasy football in terms of total targets and receptions. Okay, Malik Neighbors is number 1, but Wan'Dale Robinson not too far behind. Daniel Jones is being able to facilitate and help these top-tier wide receivers on his team find an abundance of success, coming off of a week of 14 targets, 11 receptions for 71 receiving yards. In a full PPR scoring format, it's not even close. He should probably be the number 1 player, but in a half PPR, which again, I use to meet everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard or a full PPR league, 12.6 fantasy points is a solid week every time out. But either way, again, should have already been rostered 3 weeks ago when mentioned. When we move on to Josh Downs as our number 4, the only reason I would ever pick up Josh Downs going into this week is if, in fact, we are given confirmation that Joe Flacco is going to be the starting quarterback of this team going forward because of the injury sustained by Anthony Richardson. Now, we did get reports earlier this morning that did, in fact, mention that Anthony Richardson's injury isn't as serious as it potentially could be. But that being said, I'm not going to believe all the reports. I'm going to have to wait and see how it transpires. Now, again, if we're going to be in a situation where Josh Downs is going to get himself more and more receiving utilization with Flacco, again, coming off of a game of 8 catches, 82 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, I'd imagine that Flacco would elevate Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs to both being top 24 wide receivers for the remainder of the season if Flacco was the starter. With Anthony Richardson, they're both unstartable going forward. Moving on to Allen Lazard on number 5. I mean, the fact of the matter is, amongst all the receiving options of this offense, Allen Lazard continues to be that, security blanket for Aaron Rodgers. He continues to send the ball in his direction on the 3rd and longs, on the 4th down scenarios. And as long as Allen Lazard continues to deliver, for fantasy purposes, he's going to be of value. Now, obviously, this offense looked terrible against the Denver Broncos, mainly because, again, the Denver Broncos played incredibly well as a defense for 2 consecutive weeks, pulling off victories against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New York Jets. Those are not fluke victories. That is the defense just locking in on both those overall games. So we'll have to be careful with, playing the Raiders receiving core against that Denver Broncos defense going forward. But in this case, Allen Lazard, again, continuing to provide value for fantasy purposes. Moving on to the final player, we have Trey Tucker, who for the second consecutive week scored a touchdown. Currently only rostered in 9% of Yahoo leagues, 19% of sleeper leagues. Even though we talked about a lot of Jacoby Myers, and even though Jacoby Myers had double-digit targets this last week, Trey Tucker scored a rushing touchdown, scored over 12 fantasy points, and was fantasy relevant. As long as Devontae Adams is going to be missing with this injury, Trey Tucker is certainly going to be of value for this offense. Let's move on to talk about some tight ends. Beginning with our number one, Tyler Conklin, for the second consecutive week. Of course, Tyler Conklin is in this conversation because, again, he plays 90+% of the snaps every single game. And he's coming off of a week in which he definitely had a lot of opportunity, 8 total targets, but wasn't able to deliver with those opportunities. Only had 4 receptions for 17 receiving yards. But again, as long as he's going to be given opportunity, we'll take it. Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts don't even get opportunities. So when you have a tight end of this caliber associated with quarterback of Aaron Rodgers, in an offense in which he never leaves the field and is going to get himself more and more targets every week, why not Tyler Conklin going forward? Now, Cade Otton is someone that has, over the course of the last 2 games, gotten himself 8 or more targets. Of course, yesterday, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 52 receiving yards. The week prior against Denver, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 47 receiving yards. As long as Baker Mayfield continues to send the ball in his direction and this offense continues to light up teams, of course, Cade Otton is someone that we need to pay attention to, especially in a full PPR format. Moving on to Tucker KRAFT. I had a feeling that Tucker KRAFT could, very well had himself a solid week against the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously scored himself a touchdown. Obviously had himself 9 targets with the return of Jordan Love, and that is only going to continue to expand his overall role within the offense, considering it's going to be a far more pass-heavy approach in comparison to the last couple weeks with Malik Willis. But either way, Tucker KRAFT had an advantageous matchup going against Minnesota. Going forward, if in fact we're going to find ourselves with advantageous matchups, could be a pick up and start. Otherwise, there are going to be situations in which he will be ignored because they're not going to be able to throw the ball 50 times a game. Moving on to the quarterback conversation. Again, all 3 of these guys could be picked up and played going into this upcoming week and beyond, mainly because of how well they have played already thus far this season, and we're not going to ignore it. Again, we mentioned Fields and Sam Darnold and even Andy Dalton as an honorable mention last week, but again, if in fact somehow, some way they are still available. Justin Fields coming off an incredible week of 31.98 fantasy points in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. The next 4 weeks consists of the Dallas Cowboys, Las Vegas Raiders, New York Jets, and New York Giants. The fact of the matter is, Justin Fields is going to continue to find himself success, coming off of a week in which he had 300 passing yards. Okay, it took him 40 games within the Bears organization to have over 300 passing yards. He did it in his 4th in his overall Steelers career. This is a significantly better offense. This is the best Justin Fields we have ever seen. And even though he has turned over the ball once each of the last 2 weeks, this last week with the fumble, the week prior with an interception, the fact of the matter is, when you're able to score rushing touchdowns and you're able to find yourself that kind of volume of rushing upside, and Najee Harris has yet to score a rushing touchdown this year, Justin Fields, incredible value. Sam Darnold, again, coming off another incredible week, 71% passing completion percentage, 275 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He, of course, has the best wide receiver in the league with Justin Jefferson. He has the return of Jordan Addison, and just wait until TJ Hawkinson returns. This Minnesota Vikings team, who is undefeated, who their next 4 games consist of the London game against the Jets, then they have a bye week, then the Detroit and LA Rams, could very easily string together another 3 consecutive wins and be 7-0 by the time we get to week 8. So if we're going to be in a situation in which Sam Darnold is going to continue to play well, 2+ passing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games, again, an automatic pickup and play going forward. Can't believe he is not started in more leagues, and he's not rostered in more than 50% of Yahoo leagues. It's ridiculous. Moving on to Andy Dalton, our number 3. Again, Andy Dalton for another consecutive week, putting up incredible value. The next 4 games, Chicago, Atlanta, Washington, Denver. I don't love the matchup for quarterbacks taking on the Chicago Bears, but the fact of the matter is, Andy Dalton continues to play well. And if you're going to be put in a situation in which they're throwing the ball for the majority of the day, the anticipation would be a lot of success for his fantasy upside. Now, the only quarterback I wanted to mention as an honorable mention, and I'll throw him up on screen, is Joe Flacco. If, in fact, Anthony Richardson is going to miss time, Joe Flacco is an immediate pickup and play. I'd even go ahead and play him over Andy Dalton this upcoming week because they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and every single team has torched that secondary as of late, considering, of course, they do not have the personnel to cover. All right, let's move on to the kickers and defensive conversation. All right, these are the 3 kickers I wanted to mention. First and foremost, of course, Chase McLaughlin. 3 of his 4 weeks thus far this season have been double-digit fantasy points. Coming off of 15, 10, Week 3 only had 1 point, mainly because, again, they could not even move the ball against Denver. And then most recently, yesterday against the Eagles, scoring 11 points. He's only rostered in 5% of Yahoo and Sleeper Leagues. Pick him up. Our number 2 is Austin Seibert. Currently rostered in only 2% of Yahoo Leagues, 4% of Sleeper Leagues, coming off of 3 weeks in which he's put up 22, 9, and 11 fantasy points. He's associated with the Washington Commanders offense that continues to score. So if in fact they ever get into a situation in which they're kicking field goals, which again, it has happened a lot as of late, he's continuing to deliver. The final kicker is Josh McCarty for the Los Angeles Rams. Again, the Rams are going to be playing indoors this week, only rostered in 1% of leagues. And if in fact they're going to be playing against the Green Bay Packers and find themselves struggling in any situation, of course, Carty, who's coming off of a double-digit week, could be of value. Let's move on to the defensive conversation. If in fact the Seattle Seahawks were dropped in your league, pick them up right now as you are watching this video. Go to your waiver wire and pick them up. Drop a player off of your bench that you did not start and you can just go ahead and get rid of. Because again, the Seattle Seahawks play against the New York Giants in week 5. We want to fire them up, especially if there's a possibility in which Malik Neighbors is not going to be available due to the concussion protocol. In the last 3 weeks, of course, this video is being recorded before the Monday night game against the Detroit Lions. In the last 3 weeks against Denver, New England, and Miami, they've put up 9, 6, and 13 fantasy points. They're my number 1 defense to pick up for the week. Then we move on to the Denver Broncos, another defense that we might want to pay attention to, mainly because in the last 4 games, they've put up 10, 6, 15, and 11 fantasy points, taking on Seattle, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, and the New York Jets. Again, all of those teams, as of right now, in the hunt for the playoffs. Those are good football teams. A lot of them have a winning record. And as long as they're putting up those kind of performances, the Denver Broncos will be of value, especially taking on the Las Vegas Raiders in week 5. Then we move on to the New England Patriots, who take on the Miami Dolphins. Based on what happens tonight, based on how Tyler Huntley looks, that will determine whether or not we are firing up the New England Patriots. It's pretty much a kind of test it out, let's see how they look. And if in fact they don't look like a great offense without Tua Tagovailoa once again, we'd pick up the New England Patriots and potentially fire them up, taking on the Miami Dolphins this week. All right, that's going to cover it for my week 5 waiver wire targets. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Again, we'll go ahead and be back later tonight after, of course, the events of the Monday night games in order to talk about some waiver wire pickups, trades, potential starter sits for week 5. Again, the Hidden Gems episode from Friday did hit. Again, a reminder, if you guys want to go ahead and potentially tail some of the picks that I put together, I do suggest them over the course of the week throughout the different live streams in the videos, but this one hit. Again, if you guys haven't yet already, sign up via Underdog, take advantage of the 0.5 pick'em slip for, Tyreek Hill, and put together a pick'em slip tonight and take care of that and potentially be on the winning side. But over the course of the last couple of days, we've been finding ourselves a lot of success, and hopefully we'll continue that. Once I have suggestions, I'll send it your way. And of course, hopefully we'll hit and go in the right direction. All right, guys, thank you everybody for watching. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about my top 40 running back rankings. I'll see you guys. Peace.